Okay, I'm going to go over a short video that explains operations with inequalities. Um, Greater than 9. In other words, it has to be greater than 9, not greater than or equal to 9. So 9 cannot be a choice. So any number you put in there above 9, not including 9. Less than 7, same thing. Any number that you put not including 7, so 6 would be fine, 5 would be fine, okay? All right. Okay, a bracket means you can include that number. The parentheses means you cannot include that number. So if I were to tell you all the numbers that are between 13 and 22, including 13, which is the bracket, okay, and 22 not including 22, the numbers would be 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21. Not 22 because there's a parentheses. And why did I include 13? Because it's a bracket, so that means you can include 13, okay? All right? At least 11. At least 11 means it can be 11, okay? So 18, of course, is. So at least 11 means 11, 12, 13, 14, and so on. At least means it can be. It's important to understand these distinguishments, okay? This game is for ages 4 to 9, okay? That means 4 and 9 both. Less than or equal to. That means less than or equal to with the line under it. Okay. Up here, that's just less than. That's just greater than. This means less than or equal to. This means less than or equal to. Ages 4 to 9, where A represents an age. Okay. All right. Greater than 3. Okay. More than 3 children. Okay. More than 3 means you cannot include 3. So it has to be greater than. C is greater than 3. All right. Okay, this says when you have a dot, when you put something like this on a number line, the closed dot means it can't include that number. Okay, if that were an open dot, that would mean you can't include that number. So you can't include -2, and you can't include -3. So X is anything between -2 and +3, including -2 and including +3, which means that's what gets the less than and equal to here. Less than or equal to. So -2 less than or equal to X is less than or equal to 3. Okay. All right. These are 10 apart. Between 3 and 10 is 10. Midpoint is 8. So if you the difference is 10. Since the difference is 10, that means 8 is halfway in between. 3 plus 5 is 8, and 8 plus 5 is 13. So you take the difference, basically divide by 2, and then it's 5. So you add 5 to 3 to get 8, and you also subtract 5 from 3 to get 8 as well. Okay? All right, 5. We just went over that. 5, which these two better be the same. The midpoint better be the same between the lower number and the middle number and the upper. Okay? And if we want to use this as an inequality, this plus or minus means, okay, so what it means is I'm going to take the midpoint 8 and I'm going to add and subtract the same number 5. So if I take my midpoint 8, add 5, I get 13, subtract 5, I get 3, okay? So you take the number in the middle and you add and subtract the same amount, okay? So 8 plus or minus 5. 8 plus 5 gives you 13. 8 minus 5 gives you 3. Okay, so that's what that means. I'm going to take 8 and I'm going to add and subtract the same number. Okay, so another way to think of this, if you knew this was the interval 3 and 13, and you're going to have to know this for this chapter, the interval 3, 13. All right. So you would take first take the difference, which is 10. Take that difference divided by 2, which is 5, okay? And then so if you take 3 and add 5, you get 8, and subtract 5, you get 8. So the distance between the center and each of the endpoints is 5. So then for this notation, you would take that midpoint 8 and say plus or minus 5 gives me the 3, 13 interval I'm looking for, okay? All right, so 0.591 plus or minus 0.052. How is this as an inequality? Well, if I take 0.591 and subtract 0.052, I get 0.539. And if I take 0.591 and add 0.052, I get 0.643, okay? All right? So this is going backwards from what we did up there. I'm going to take the middle. This is the middle point. I'm going to add and subtract this to get this for the lower and this for the higher. Subtract this to get this, add this to get this, okay? All right, and again, the midpoint is in between. If I take these two, how I do that mathematically is add the two together and divide by 2 to get the difference. Well, I would do that. The difference between the upper bound and the midpoint. Well, okay, to find the midpoint, you would add these two and divide by 2. So 0.173 plus 0.335, take that addition and then divide that by 2, you get 0.254. So that's the midpoint. So then, hold on. Okay, I decided to do a little legwork on this for you. Okay, to find the midpoint, you would take the addition of these two numbers, add them up, okay, hit equals, make sure you hit equals first, is 0.508, okay? Then you take that 0.508 and you divide that by 2 to get 0.254. So the midpoint of this, between this number and this point, is the middle of it, is right in the middle, is 0.254, okay? All right, so now we basically have P, think of the P, the midpoint there, as 0.254. So 0.173 is less than 0.254, which is less than 0.335. Okay, that's the middle of the point. So what is actually I'll type that in here real quick. So it goes 0.173, that's the left, and then the midpoint is 0.254, and then the upper is 0.335, okay? All right? That'll look a little better, okay? So there it is, the lower, the midpoint, and the upper, okay? Now, so 0.254 is the midpoint, so if the difference between the upper bound and the midpoint is the same as the difference between the lower bound and the midpoint. So if I take 0.25, or if I take the upper 0.335 minus 0.254, I get 0.081. And I also, if I take the center, which is 0.254, and subtract 0.173, I also get 0.081. So 0.173, I add 0.081 to get 0.254, and then I add 0.081 again to get 0.335, 0.254 being in the middle, and the distance between this one and this one is the same as between this one and this one, which is 0.081. So we write the answer as I'm going to take 0.254, which is a midpoint, the number right in the middle, and I'm going to add and subtract 0.081 to get the two numbers that I'm looking for. Add and subtract, okay? Hope that makes sense. All right. We just went over that. Do the same thing here. Find the midpoint, add and subtract the difference, okay? Just gives you a little more exercise, okay? Same thing that just went over. Okay, so now we want to do it backwards. So now this is the midpoint. We're going to go backwards now. Over here, we said here's the inequality. Let's find the, make it so this is the midpoint plus or minus, the midpoint plus or minus 52.2. The midpoint of these two is 99.2, and the distance between 99.2 and this is 52.2, and also the distance between 99.2 and this is also 52.2. So I take 99.2 in the middle, add and subtract 52.2, and I get this. Now we're going to go backwards. So that means this is the midpoint now, okay? This is the, this is the midpoint, okay? All right? So now if I take 621.8 and subtract 138.5, I'm going to get 483.3, okay? And at the same time, if I take 621.8 and I add 138.5, I'm going to get 760.3. So this goes from midpoint plus or minus the margin there. And so I subtract it to get this lower number of the inequality, and the add it to get that number, okay? All right? Okay, this was just an example, so ignore that, except the fact that that's how they want the answer. Parenthesis, lower number, comma, upper number, end parenthesis. So if I take 0.605 and I subtract 0.03, I get 0.575. If I take 0.605 and add 0.03, I get 0.635. And how I do that in interval form, this means interval form, I want to do a left parenthesis, the lower number, comma, higher number, end parenthesis, okay? You'll be asked to do that in this section, okay? And margin of error. Now, margin of error is the same thing as the margin of error is this right here, okay? 0.605, the margin of error is 0.03. So I take 0.605, add 0.03 to get the upper number, 0.605 minus the margin of error to get the lower number, okay? So this 0.03 that you're adding and subtracting from the midpoint is called the margin of error in this chapter, okay? So basically it's the same thing. We're just going to call it margin of error now, which that's what this is. The number we're adding and subtracting, you know, in other words, the number from, so in this case, the margin of error is 0.081. So I'm taking the midpoint, 0.254. I'm adding the margin of error, 0.081 to get 0.335. I'm subtracting the margin of error, 0.081 to get 0.173. So this point in this problem, the margin of error is 0.081. Okay. All right. So 75. So now convert from percentage to decimal. 75% is 0.75. 0.75 plus the margin of error of 0.06 is 0.81. And 0.75 minus the margin of error of 0.06 is 0.69, okay? So they give you the information in percentage, but they ask you for the answer in a decimal. So make sure you know that we're aware of that, okay? All right. Margin of error is 7%. So again, all we do is take the middle, which is 0.85, add the margin of error to get 0.92, subtract the margin of error to get 0.78, okay? Converting from percent to decimal, okay? And then again, this time we go back to, okay, we're going to find the midpoint first. Remember, finding the midpoint is adding these two up and dividing by 2. When I add 75 and 89 and divide by 2, I get 82, okay? And then the distance between 82 and 75 is 7, so that's your margin of error. So 82 plus or minus the margin of error is 7, okay? All right, and same thing here, okay? Same thing here.